a lot of what we see nowadays deals with, in particularly, one main group's ideology, is that there are too many people on the earth. And so why is it that this is very prevalent among young generations? 1 out of 5 adult members of Gen Z identify as LGBTQ. Now, some people might say, well, it's for virtue points. People might say that, they just want to be part of the cool kids, because this is where many young people. Now, what a lot of people don't understand is that, of course, a lot of this has to deal with depopulation and the idea, of course, we've got too many people on the planet and not enough resources. And so how do you stop this problem if this is your narrative, and especially if you're in a position of authority, or you're in a position where you have influence and power? Well, you push the narrative that women's rights, right? Women's rights are key to slowing population growth. And this is from an article back from 2011. And it says the best way to slow growth is ensuring that people can make choices about childbearing, but fertility rates remain high where women's status is low. It's important to keep that into understanding, because that's the point. That's why you look at places like for example, in Sweden, where Sweden just, voted to vote out their left-leaning government, right? So Swedish prime minister has resigned after her government was defeated in Sunday's election. But Sweden still has the same promises. If you read this article from The Hedge, it talks about that Sweden still has a lot of the same principles intact, which is equality, feminism, etc. That didn't go away. So yes, the people are acknowledging the country's going to shit. We've got a lot of crime. We're importing all these refugees. But why? It's because Sweden has a very low birth rate. And so to keep up with all the social programs that the government has instituted, because this is the problem, right? If you're obviously not having children, your demographic is going low. It has to change. And so what you have to do is you either have to have more kids to basically and eventually go back to work to pay for all the social programs to support the people, the elderly population, or you have to import people. Now, obviously that still works to depopulation, because you can say, well, we'll just pull from this demographic over here. But the only reason that you're able to pull from those people over there is because they're still patriarchal. That's why you look at Europe, and where does Europe pull from? Europe pulls from the Middle East, right? Middle East is still a people where you still have patriarchy, right? Where women, right, in that area of the country, right, women's rights are low. And so what is the result? Fertility rates are high. Same thing in Hispanic countries. Why is it that America and Canada, they're able to pull from the southern border? Why is America's borders wide open? Is because in Hispanic countries, further south, especially if you go further south of Mexico, patriarchy is still relevant. And as a result, women's rights are low. And as a result of that, fertility is high. That's why, you get a lot of these men that travel overseas. And where do they typically travel to, right? They go to Mexico, they go to Colombia, they go to Brazil, right? They go to many of these second and third world areas, right? And the women there are so accommodating. Why? Because of patriarchy. Patriarchy in those countries is still intact, and feminism, for the most part, doesn't exist. And so the natural gender roles are still intact. The societal contract between between men and women remains intact. And so the women still adopt their feminine roles, and the men are still required to be providers. Now, the problem is when you get first world men who take their mindset and then they go into second and third world countries, and they take that same sort of mindset there and they create problems there, where they go out and they pay for prostitution, they pay to commit fornication, they leave those countries, and they leave those countries with women pregnant with child, and then they bring those same problems, that same mindset of their first world countries, which is what men do. One of the main reasons why men love, at least if you're remotely attractive, if you're fit, and you have any sort of financial stability, it's very easy to get sex in first world countries because these women are in essence liberated. They don't have that same sort of mindset that I have to have a child, I have to create a family, I have to keep my virginity or my chastity intact, so to speak. And so many of these women are you can have sex with them easily. You have sex on the first date or second date, third date, etc. So when you take that sort of a mindset of where you can just sleep around, the problem is what it results in, which is obviously single motherhood. And America has the highest single motherhood. And what do overwhelmingly have shown, and I've talked about this numerous times, that if women don't have a man in their life to support them, they will vote that all men will support them via taxation and the expansion of the government. And this is what happened. This is what is happening in America and in all Western countries where you have the adoption. This is why, the Bible talked about that the person who's committing fornication is sinning against his own flesh. And a lot of times we don't understand how that fully plays out. You might think, well, maybe I'll have an STD, but it's not just that. It's also societal. Society. This is how it impacts society over periods of time. And so obviously we typically don't have the vision and the ability to see into the future, to see how will this play out in the long run. We can debate about it, but people will say, no, this isn't going to happen, or it takes a village sort of mindset. Everybody raises kids, etc. And this is what you get. And so in many Western countries, this will continue to go on. Now, of course, a lot of this is self-correcting, because as what you're seeing right now in many, like in Sweden and many other European countries, where the population of the Muslims are growing to the point where the people are looking around and they're like, I don't see faces that look like me in my area, because they're being, in essence, replaced. And many Americans feel that way as well. What they refer to as the brownification of America, because they're pulling from the southern border. And a lot of it results around the elevated lifestyle that Americans are able to live because of the dollar being the world reserve currency. And as a result, the standard of living in America, by comparison to many other countries, is 20 to 30% higher. It's not because America produces more. It's because America is a welfare state. And the only way that Americans are able to live this very high and elevated lifestyle is because of the welfare. A lot of the welfare will go away eventually. There will be a generation where all that will collapse. We'll see if it will be in our generation. But it always happens. And every socialist country goes this route. In a small scale, right? Like in places like in Venezuela, they're socially able to live off of the wealthy who live in their area. Americans are able to live their lifestyle because they live off of the entire globe for the most part. That will go away, especially what you're seeing with the BRICS nations, where you have Brazil and Russia and India and China, as well as South Africa, that are basically coming together to create a commodities-based currency. And eventually, as other countries and more countries, like, for example, Serbia and Mexico and Argentina, that are looking at the BRICS nations and are saying, we need to side with them. And so as more nations do that, this problem, right, this nonsense of the LGBTQ, it will self-correct, because people will become impoverished, and they'll realize we have to go to work, and then the patriarchy will return. This is the only way that patriarchy will be able to return to America, is when the country completely economically collapses. Because as long as there's welfare, then I don't need no man. I can just marry the government. I don't need kids, right? I can identify as an apple. I can identify as a cat, or as a man, or as a non-binary, whatever. Because at the end of the day, I just rely on the state. Eventually this goes away, and the quote-unquote rights of women, they disappear. A perfect example is, look at what happened in Afghanistan, right? When the Afghanistan men eventually pushed out the American army, did the feminist women in Afghanistan shoulder their rifle and go to war? No, they went right back to the kitchen. They went right back to assuming their natural gender roles, and it's always that way. That's why the women in Venezuela are so feminist, right? They're so feminine right now. There were slut walks in Venezuela. There was the "I don't need no man" mindset in Venezuela, right up until they were eating zoo animals, and then they realized, you know what? Maybe I do need a man. And that's why most of these very well-educated women, there are many well-educated women in Venezuela that moved to Colombia that became prostitutes. And that will be the outcome for many American women who opt for this independence, because in that environment, men may not want to take on the responsibility of shouldering a wife, especially if you've already lived a life of fornication and you've pseudo prostituted yourself. Men aren't going to look at you as they say, you can't turn a hoe into a housewife. That's why you go into Venezuela, you go into Colombia, you go to places like to Cartagena, you go downtown into places in Bogota, you go to where the nightlife is. What you see is a lot of Venezuelan prostitutes. And it will be that way as well in America, because many of these women who are very feminist will experience that exact same thing, because men will be like, no, I'm not looking to take a woman like you as a wife. I don't want that responsibility. And for many of them, pick your country, right? Pick your ex, westernized country. All the women experience the exact same thing. Overwhelmingly, most of them end up becoming prostitutes. And this is what we have. You have this in America right now. You have a lot of women that are doing OnlyFans, either on Twitch or all these other different sites. They pseudo sell themselves already, just basically preparing them for the eventual collapse. These people think that they're being liberated from the patriarchy, but they're being enslaved by the government. Anyway, I'm going to leave it here. Thanks for watching, and leave your comment below, and I'll check you next time.